Physics tells us that two objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time, but does that principle also apply to superpowers? This Wednesday, North Korea will be the topic du jour for U.S. and Chinese officials as they meet to discuss how to curb the hostile nation's missile program. China's close ties with North Korea make it harder to rein in Pyongyang than it might otherwise be, but they also mean China may have more clout than the U.S. on a key international challenge. That's one more sign of growing Chinese influence that has many international observers uneasy. The director of Harvard's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, Graham Allison, discusses this dynamic in his new book, Destined for War, Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap? And Graham Allison joins me now. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
So for viewers who may need a classical history refresher, what is Thucydides' Trap?
Well, let me, so having now been making presentations about the book, first I know Thucydides is a mouthful.
It is. So did I say it okay?
You've said it
okay,
good. But Thucydides, it's a mouthful. It's multisyllabic, but it's somebody who should be part of every one of your viewers' mental library.
All right, so pay attention, everyone. So why is Thucydides?
Thucydides was the founder of history. He invented what we think of today as history, that is, an accurate account of what actually happened. And he gave an account of the Peloponnesian War between the two great city-states of classical Greece. And he said it was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made the war inevitable. So Thucydides' trap is the severe structural stress that occurs when a rising power, like Athens or China, threatens to displace a ruling power, like Sparta or the U.S.
Tell me if I have this right. You say that you've identified 16 times in the past half
500
millennium,
years.
past 500 years, that this dynamic has presented itself. And in 12 of those 16 cases, it has led to a large conflict, right?
Absolutely.
All right.
And in 4, not. So when Thucydides said this line about inevitable, he was exaggerating a little bit. I think that if you look at it in context, that's hyperbole. He would just say likely, very likely.
Give me some reminders of cases in which this has led to war and cases in which it has not. And I'd love to try to accentuate the positive because it's a somewhat scary topic, but where have we seen conflicts break out when this dynamic?
Well, I think the case that's the most worrisome and the thing that's closest to North Korea today is World War I. So again, we should remember what was happening 100 years ago right now, today. Actually, just 2 months earlier, in 1917, the U.S. had entered World War II. How in the world, in this case, I have a good chapter on this in the book, how could the assassination of an archduke in Sarajevo by a Serbian terrorist have lit a match that burned down the whole house of Europe? It's incredible. And even, I've studied this for 50 years. Every time I go through it, it's way less credible that the assassination of the Archduke produced a war than it is that Kim Jong-un could produce a war today.
How does that fit into this template? Because a lot of us, myself included, think of World War I as this multipolar conflict that occurred because of this crazy system of alliances that had evolved over the years. So who was the rising power and who was the anxious established power?
The fundamental dynamic, Thucydides would teach us, and this I think most historians would agree, was a rising Germany that was threatening to rival and ultimately eclipse a ruling Great Britain. Britain had been the ruling power for a century, ruled the waves. The sun never set on the British Empire. Britain had as its empire India, Canada, South Africa. So India, the Brits could not imagine another power in Europe as strong as they were. Germany had unified in 1870, and then gone on a spurt in which by 1900 it was already as big as GDP as Britain.
Huge naval expansion, right?
And they built a big navy. So that became the fundamental dynamic. Now, because of that, as Thucydides explained to us, the ruling power becomes afraid. So it becomes entangled with some other allies, which the British would have never been. The British thought the French were useless, and they thought the Russians were dangerous. But they got entangled with both of them.
Because they were anxious.
Because they were anxious.
Germany.
And similarly, the rising power didn't have but one ally, Austria-Hungary. It was a lousy ally. They didn't have any respect for it, but it was the only one I got. So.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to the present day. Donald Trump campaigned as an isolationist, and he still seems to have some isolationist tendencies, especially when collaboration is concerned, for example, pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. Do you think that this potential conflict with China that you envision is more or less likely with Donald Trump in the White House than it would have been with a more classic internationalist like Hillary Clinton?
Very good question. Very good question. So I would say the fundamental danger that Thucydides identifies, the rising China, which is impacting the U.S. and the whole international order that we built, that was happening in 2000, that was happening in 2010, that'll be happening in 2020, irrespective of who's in the White House. So that's the fundamental point. But in the case of Trump, there's an extra added wild card or uncertainty for a new president who's not experienced in this space, who's not really knowledgeable about this space, and who's impulsive. In the current case, you could easily imagine North Korea launching a ICBM
Yes.
and Trump attacking North Korea, and then one thing leads to the other, and it looks a lot like the assassination of the Archduke.
China intervening on North Korea's behalf,
Right.
perhaps? Okay. You say in the book that the best way to prevent this dynamic from leading to a war with China is, and I'm going to quote here, radical changes in attitudes and actions by leaders and publics alike. What does that mean in practice?
Well, for Americans, the idea that there could be another country as big and strong as we are is incredible. And most people won't even accept the facts today. I have a good chapter in the book on the rise of China. One simply can't believe it. The Chinese economy today is bigger today than the American economy, measured by the yardstick that both the IMF and CIA says is the best yardstick. You could ask any American about that. No, they don't believe it. Yeah.
Okay, so is one change that you think we need to embrace acceptance that China has eclipsed us economically?
We should recognize that there's another, as Lee Kuan Yew put it, another big player who's likely to be the biggest player in the history of the world. We can't wish that away. We have to look at it very, very specifically.
Okay.
And secondly, we have to look at the question of how could this Thucydidean dynamic, which is in many, many previous cases, let external events that would otherwise be inconsequential produce a conflict. Let's identify the whole list of them, and let's talk about them very candidly, because neither the U.S. nor China wants to be dragged into a war by Kim Jong-un, but he's not consulting us. So go through those, and then third, then the specific terms of how much I adapt, how much you adapt, how much we adjust. So that's a matter of negotiation.
Well, if that is the ideal, we should probably note that the U.S.-China diplomatic and security dialogue is meeting for the first time this week, a new Trump-related initiative. Sounds like you welcome that development.
I welcome that development. I welcome the initial conversations at Mar-a-Lago between Xi Jinping and Trump, where they began the conversation about North Korea. But what hasn't happened, not between Trump and Xi, and what's not going to happen at this meeting, unless I'm, surprised, is a couple of adults sit down and say, wait a minute, this North Korean thing could get completely out of hand. Don't take our previous constraints. Let's just look at how can we solve this problem together.
I hope it happens. It's a
I do too.
So, all right, Graham Allison, thank you, and congrats on the book.
Thank you very much for having me.
That book, again, is Destined for War, Can America and China Escape Thucydides' Trap?